Okay, so when it comes to evaluating real estate investments and breaking it down into a few easy steps and a process in itself, step one then is to know your market, the market climate, and understand what is going on in the market wherever you're considering investing. So that's where you'll have asked yourself, is investing for you? And here's where you decide, is my hard earned cash going to Idaho real estate investments? And that brings us to step two. Step two is going to be applying those market conditions in the best way possible for your advantage. And so that's going to involve how you structure the deal. It's going to involve financing. And from there, we move into step three, which is where you would actually run the number and run the numbers and run a pro forma. And so for now, we're going to move into uh, applying the market knowledge and in a way that sets realistic expectations. Okay, so cap rates are a metric that we'll discuss as we review the pro forma in step three. Right now in Idaho and particularly in the Treasure Valley area, cap rates are barely hovering near the 5% range, and sometimes they're less. In fact, sometimes to see a 5% cap rate, the calculation is done using market rents or the rents of tomorrow or stabilized rents when today's rents or the current rents or the actual rents are a little bit lower. But in general, we're hovering around a 5% cap rate. Cash on cash return on investment isn't standing up on its own, so to speak. It's not dropping any jaws, but once you add principal pay down and even some conservative appreciation numbers, that sure helps get that number up to compelling. And of course, the tax advantages and the tangibility are gravy. So your team should be able to help advise on whether the deal is on the high side or low side of market, and if your cash flow is looking good based on where you're at. But cash creates cash flow. So one of the ways to navigate a market where returns have gotten squeezed by the high prices we've seen here in Boise is increasing down payments. The minimum amount down required by the lender for an investment property, 1 to 4 units, or a single family home or a fourplex, is typically only 20%. And often it's going to hit 25% for larger properties, which is a commercial loan. And that's going to be when you have more than 4 units, not four, but more than four, greater than four. But at this time, those minimum amount of down payments required by lenders don't tend to produce cash flow. So the way to navigate that market condition is more out of pocket cash to invest. More money down makes the deal more conservative and it creates cash flow. Anything cash flows with 100% down, we say, right? So what's the right number for you? Well, if you're thinking of a break-even point, a realistic down payment for breaking even or experiencing a little cash flow is going to be closer to 25 or 35%. The great thing about today's climate is that interest rates are helping the cash flow despite the increasing prices because they are historically low. Another thing to note on this line of thinking is appreciation is a form of speculation. And so while we can celebrate appreciation, we don't want to be too aggressive in counting it too early. So far in this market, investors have made the biggest gains in appreciation. That's where they've made all the money. It's not been through the cash flow recently because appreciation has been so strong. And that depends on when you buy. The cash flow may have still been there, but the appreciation has really spiked in our market. But it's a future event, and nobody knows the future. The spike should level off at some point, celebrate it, but don't 100% bank on it if you're trying to keep your investments conservative or smarter, safer. The other factor with this market and navigating it successfully is allowing time for stabilization. Stabilization is the time it takes to get rents from their current amount to up to the market rents. And I'll always look at market rents and current rents when I run a pro forma. And a reasonable amount of time to plan on is 18 to 24 months to stabilize the rents to market with decent tenants, assuming that you're not going to want to do huge increases that might induce move outs. Keep in mind, move outs are oftentimes more costly than the gain you would get from a rent increase. And then if you have a special account that your rental funds are going into, or if you have partners, being more conservative with your payouts and your cash reserves, the amount of money you're leaving in that account, makes sense in this climate, AKA those rainy day funds we talked about at the very beginning. So, due to uncertainties surrounding COVID and life, you might consider being more conservative, allowing more time for stabilization and keeping a little extra cash in the bank. Another thing you can do is apply a stress test. Once you think you've chosen your down payment amount, you can run your numbers again, and you've run your numbers in the standard fashion. You can run them again and add a little stress, perhaps seeing what happens if rents went down 15%. Incidentally, that's about the most we saw rents really drop in the Great Recession. Or see what happens if you reduce occupancy to 90%, AKA 10% vacancy. Vacancy around here has not gone much higher than that to my recollection, but it's been hovering well below 5 for a long time now. And so we've been running our numbers with a 3% vacancy, and that's even been high. I've recently built in a little extra cushion and put in 4%. We're not trying to break your numbers by applying the stress test, which it actually can do. Rather, we're trying to make sure your investment would still cash flow and at what amount when you're determining your down payment. So you can see what that looks like. Speaking of stress, some points to stress would be getting your cash or financing lined up before your offer. Got to get your ducks in a row. And then when you do present your offer, show the sellers the money. Submit offers with proof of funds or an approval letter, so there's no question on them that you're good to go. And especially when sellers have their choice of buyers, which has been common in this market lately, that can really make a difference. Use local lenders. Not a widespread nationwide tip that I know of, but locally speaking, our lenders have a reputation to uphold and they get the job done. And they do, they close on time. When I see an out-of-state lender, or when I have a client who wants to use an out-of-state lender, I know there's more risk at the deal. It just, for whatever reason, there's just a few differences, there's a few variances, and deals are much clunkier. So that means sellers also know that, sellers agents know that, and they're advised, and they may prioritize a local lender. And finally, of course, cash is king. A cash offer with a quick close is highly likely to land a deal. So if that's where you're at, you may have a little bit extra leverage compared to what you would have if you were using financing. So financing options. Your lenders should be responsive and able to help you evaluate various financing options. It all comes back to that power team you need to establish to make sure you can ask the questions and get good advice from people who have your best interest in mind. But did you know that sometimes lenders can help you become a cash buyer? More on that in a few. First, some financing fun facts. Conventional loans, 1 to 4 units, rentals, usually require 20% down for investors, but you may have paid less when you were buying a primary residence. Also, when you're getting a primary residence, your interest may be lower if it's an owner-occupied purchase than it would be for investor purchases. In October 2020, rates are around 3.5% for a 30-year fixed loan right now. A 30-day close is the norm, but refinances are affecting that. So be careful, use that local lender and make sure that your lender is not getting bogged down with so many refinances that they're dropping the ball on purchases. Commercial loans are 5 or more units, and usually there is 25% down involved or more, but 20% is possible. I know a guy. I'll introduce you. Often shorter term loans, and they're often shorter term, and the interest rates may not be fixed. And so you may have a 10-year note, and so you'd have to refinance or do something in 10 years, but maybe the interest is only fixed for 5 years. And in October 2020, rates are around 4% for that. And a 60-day close is the norm for some commercial lenders. And that is better than some of the national counterparts might see. So another thing Idaho has a advantage on, or an Idaho lender has an advantage on. So here's a sample commercial loan on 5+ units and some great local options, including credit unions, which have really been stepping out and standing out as viable, strong lending choices here in the Valley. This scenario was given to me by Westmark Credit Union, Matt Craner. A 75 loan to value translates into a 25% down payment. So for 25% down with a 30-year amortization, they're doing 3.95% in October 2020. Or they will offer a 20% down payment option, but it's only going to have the 25-year amortization, which will bring the payment up a little bit at 3.95%. Washington Federal also has a commercial loan department, and we'll get into lower rates than that, but it will be that 7 to 10-year term and maybe only a 5-year locked interest rate. And they may require more down payment, and that won't be known in advance until it goes through underwriting. So you need to be prepared to be told at the last minute more down payment is required. But how can lenders create cash buyers? Well, for one, with a home equity line of credit, AKA HELOC. Those funds are treated the same as cash. Now, typically for it to be the same as cash, that HELOC has to be completed. And that loan will just be sitting there and you're not getting any interest, you're not using it. It's like a line of credit, so you only pay for it if you use it. And it's backed by or secured against a primary residence or another piece of real estate. And investors with equity in a home can use it to get a line of credit and make a purchase that has a cash equivalent type of effect. Now, the other option would be using cash or a home equity line of credit or something that you don't want to be a long-term solution, but then getting a loan after the fact on the property. And that would be through a cash out refinance, for example. And what a cash out refinance is it allows you to take the existing value, what a property would appraise for, and get a line of credit or a new loan against it. You refinance the current loan against it, and you can only go to a 70% loan to value. So it'd be the equivalent of having a 30% down payment, but what they give you is 70% of the value. So on $1 million property, they would lend up to $700,000, and that would include any current balance that you already have on it. You'd have to subtract that $200,000 loan and some closing costs, and that would give you, say, $500,000 in cash that you could use to make a cash purchase. In October 2020, the rate from ICCU on cash out refinances was 3.5% or is 3.5%. You can use this tool to consolidate loans if desired. Say you've got 10 loans out there and you don't want to pay 10 refinance fees. You could do a cash out refinance on one property and use that money to pay off the other higher interest notes. So in essence, you've got one big loan for 3 properties instead of doing 3 refinances or 3 loans. In any event, a cash out refinance is another way to become a cash buyer with the help of a lender. Now, a refinance, AKA refi, because sometimes we can't help but use industry lingo, can also be used to help reduce your payments or your debt to income ratio. So that would be a regular refinance. The rule of thumb on whether any refinance is worthwhile and worth the expense that it adds and the reset of the amortization since you start back off at year 1 would be if your loan balance is at least greater than 100,000 or the interest rate is somewhere around a percentage point higher than where you're currently at on that loan. Any rules of thumb are to be taken with a grain of salt, but if you only owe 50,000 on a property or the difference is only 0.5%, something like that might be a good reason not to refinance, despite the fact that the current interest rates are so low. Refinancing is a really strong option for a lot of investors that will either free up debt to income ratio on the balance sheet their lenders are using to evaluate them as borrowers, or to literally free up cash and become a cash borrower. ICCU is quoting 100 days on their refinances, and they're doing that, I believe, so that they can prioritize hitting those 30-day closings on their standard loans. So these lenders are pinched with refinances right now, and they're getting bogged down. And that's a great thing for ICCU to do to make sure that they're not going to start losing their reputation by way of closing late, because they are known for on-time closings, which is an important thing in the industry. You never know when someone else is using the money from your loan to fund their next purchase. And as all contracts read, time is of the essence in real estate. So closing late is sometimes can be done, but it's never the goal. And you want a lender who's going to be getting the job done. So knowing the market is going to enable knowing the best ways to work within it. In summary, taking advantage of low interest rates is a reasonable consideration, worth running some numbers on, and examining advantageous lending options with local lenders is something that they should help you do. And there are a few options for your deals. Being more conservative in an aggressive market is one way to add a little safety. And doing that might mean structuring deals differently, say with higher down payments, 50% down instead of 20% if you can pull it off. When calculating that number and your personal tolerance and your personal comfort zone, adding a stress test to your numbers to see how they would look in a different climate is one way to come up with what that ideal down payment would be. And then finally, knowing the market enables you to have realistic expectations and goals, whether it's from knowing what kind of cap rate you might expect, maybe around 5%, or knowing what kind of time it might take to stabilize or hit your desired cap rate, and planning your overall hold period. Planning for a longer term hold or is something that people might do at this time, or evaluating your strategies accordingly. So that's why we got to know the market and then apply what we know about the market before we run those numbers and start hitting those pro formas hard.